First bevel I'm going to use is our large bevel. And again, these are just the beginner tools that we offer here, but I want to show you that we can tool a pattern like this even with these beginner tools there. So we don't have a variety of steepness in bevels in the kit. There's just the large and the small. So we need to keep in mind that, again, even though it feels like we're tooling on thicker leather, we are on that thin little 3-ounce piece there on top that we're tooling through. So we didn't really talk about it when we were cutting, but I'm not cutting those super deep, just nice average cuts in there, so I don't want to cut through that layer of leather. But same thing with beveling. I'm going to start with our borders here, and we're beveling our borders in towards that floral because the floral's tucking underneath that border. But I'm not hitting my bevel super hard either. I just want a nice light bevel in there, but I want even burnishing on it. So every time I'm hitting that bevel, I'm moving it. Sometimes you need to slow down and get that feel of it and get your timing before you try to match this sound. You need both your hands moving together. We talked about those points that weren't connected when we cut. You can see once we bevel that together, it looks like it's cut all the way there. Border all bevel. Now I'm going to start going around and work on any of the lines that I can easily get with that large bevel, because we're going to actually switch bevels partway through and come in to some of the inside curves that are going to be a whole lot easier to get with that smaller bevel. Now when we talk about direction to bevel, which side of the line to bevel on, that one we mentioned on that border when we were talking about layering, right? We want that floral going under a border. So we can think of it in terms of layering. You're beveling towards something, you're pushing it back. You know, if I'm beveling away from something, I'm picking it up. For example, this flower stem here that I'm beveling away from it right now. There's a shadow on the outside of it as I'm beveling. So that means I'm picking that stem up to where it's sitting on top. I can go to the other side of that stem, bevel that away to make sure that that stem is the dominant one on top. Okay, then we can layer out from there. But at first, especially if you're just getting started, that might sound super confusing. You're like, well, I don't even know which stem should be on top or anything, and I can't tell. It just looks like a bunch of lines to me. Pretty reasonable. That's kind of how it looks to all of us when we start. So don't feel bad. Don't worry about that. And let's simplify it a little bit. So anywhere there's a background spot, we're going to be beveling towards the background. Think about the background being the furthest thing back, because we want all of our floral up over that, right? Now, which spots are background spots? On our pattern, it's the ones that are grayed out there. So it's a whole lot easier to see. This might look like a mess of lines. This, even though it's the same lines, a little easier to see that you have those backgrounds. So you can either look side by side, or when you transfer that pattern, you can always put a little dot down in those background spots that'll show up when you transfer. Then when you have a background spot and you can see that's a background, we know that all of our lines are going to bevel towards that background. So, for example, right here is a background spot. So I know that this line is touching that space, so it needs to bevel towards it. This line is touching that space, so it needs to bevel towards it. Once I start on a line in one direction, I stay on it. I'm not going to skip to the other side of that. This line actually continues under that pedal, so I can keep going on that as well. Now back to that same background spot, this line's touching that. So I bevel towards it. Now even the edge of this pedal is touching that background spot. So I know that that one bevels towards it as well. Now if you go through your whole pattern, looking at just your background spots and beveling towards those background spots, I'm thinking you're going to get just about every line in this pattern beveled. It's a very simple rule of thumb to follow that's going to get you a long ways through most of your patterns. When we were working with our swivel knife, we talked about fading lines out. And the better that you fade with your knife, the easier it is to fade with your bevel. Well, again, which lines were we talking about fading out? Any of these ones that end within the vine work. So this line's coming down and it ends right here, just kind of out of nowhere. It stops in there, right? So we faded that out with our knife. Now we're going to fade it with the bevel as well. So it actually starts right up here. Now to fade that out, you can hear the difference. See how right there at the end we're just barely touching that. And that's where, I mean, the better you fade that with your knife, the easier it's going to be to fade with the bevel. We're going to continue getting these bigger, longer lines that we can get with the larger bevel, and then we're going to come back and switch bevels and talk a little bit about that smaller bevel. So here, once I get to the inside curves of these flower petals, I'm stopping right there, and we're going to come out and get all those curves and some of the little lines with that small bevel. Now switching over to the small bevel, so it's a little bit narrower of a face to it. Still about the same angle as our large one, but being a little bit narrower, it's going to be easier to fit around little tight curves. So like right here on the edge, this one that has that little hook to it, we can get around that a lot easier because the face of that bevel is a lot smaller, so it's not trying to chew up extra leather around there. Any of these small lines, the little curves, much easier with that small bevel. We're still running that the same way we do the large one. We move it just a little bit at a time. Every time I hit that tool down, that way we can keep a nice smooth bevel line in there. It's also nice inside some of the tighter curves. So this is a little bit tighter curve here. And get right around there, and again, it just fits inside that curve a little better, makes that pop up a little bit nicer. Okay, now mainly I got one more curve here, and then the really spot that this is going to help with is on the outside of these flower petals, mainly because we have curves both ways. We have a tighter curve going around the outside, and then a smaller curve in between the ridges on those petals as well. Now, the other thing is, if you're having problems with your leather moving around on you, sometimes with a small project like this, you're trying to chase it as you're working on it. Notice how I'm holding my bevel and my leather at the same time. So my fingers are down low on my tool. My ring finger is right here at the bottom of that tool, and my ring finger and my pinky are both pressing down on that leather, holding that in place. As I need to, I readjust my hand. The other thing you can do, especially with a pattern like this, there's plenty of room out on this side, is you can use a weight and set that down on there. So I can set that weight just like that, and that's going to help that move around as well. This is just a bag with some BBs in it, but I'm showing you how to do it without using that. Just using your fingers, you can keep that in place.